Good morning, entrepreneurs and builders. Welcome to the Breaking Business Podcast, where we don't just talk marketing and entrepreneurship, we dissect it, we challenge it, we extract those golden nuggets that you can actually use every single day. Business is in your blood, and I'm here to make it boil. I'm your host, Dr. Wood. Now let's break it down and build something great. Today, I wanted to cover a topic that I found kind of interesting. So, over the past, several months, years even, I have always had this fascination of potentially growing my own mushroom farm. And I know it kind of sounds ridiculous, right? So, what is the value in mushroom growing? What is the value in farming, essentially, from your garage as somebody who's got like no space whatsoever? And let's be honest, it would be nice and it would be fun to just essentially grow, maybe spray it a little bit, have it bloom, have it create new oyster clusters. And essentially, I just every 6 weeks or so, I chop them, pick them up, pack them up, and send them along their way for profit. And that would be fine. But I started researching a little bit about it, and I wanted to share with you guys my thoughts on the research that I found. So, let me just start off. When I started researching, I was doing things like urban gardening, I was doing things like vertical farms, and researching all the various aspects on, things like lighting, spacing, spore production, cost of goods sold around it, the viability of the price points. And as I was doing it I was doing it like for lettuce, I was doing it for fruits and vegetables, I was doing it for, nuts and even coffee at one point. And I thought to myself, what if I did snails? And then that rabbit hole of snail breeding and snail farming, I was like, okay, well, what about algae or super greens, microgreens? And I stumbled across this ecosystem design between snails, mushrooms, and algae farming. And I thought to myself, well, that's neat because the mushrooms grow in an environment that is great for driftwood and dark and essentially slimy. And snails thrive on slimy, but also feed off of microgreens. Microgreens in a cool, circulated environment grow. And, I thought to myself, what if I did gourmet mushrooms? Oyster mushrooms, lion's mane, various lack of sunlight needing in a little, I'd say a little 9 by 9 closet, or I don't even know what size that is, but just a little small closet. And I kind of was hooked a little bit because mushrooms don't need that sunlight, they don't need vast fields, and then they grow in what I can control in kind of this microclimate that will have a synergist relationship with snails, which would then produce and have a market for, and I could sell the excess. Microgreens, algae, moss, these types of ever ever growing, assuming that all the conditions are right and the upkeep is properly maintained. I thought to myself, well, that would be a neat business model, right? I have these three things that are seemingly feeding off of each other to create a business model that I could sell the excess, assuming that I don't take more than is produced and I have this baseline foundation of the growth model. This could be a profitable endeavor. And so my initial investment on the research was around, $1,200 to $1,500. I wanted to see the proof of concept. I wanted to understand the process of making this mushroom farm because essentially I need the mushroom aspect of the business to facilitate into the snail portion and then also into the algae portion. So this video is primarily a theoretical model. but I wanted to describe to you the different processes and thoughts around it, and potentially maybe you might want to grow some mushrooms on, as a little side hustle and figure out what works for you. Maybe it's a little $100 a month business. Maybe you turn it into a factory. Who knows? But I want to take you on this journey. So, in the beginning, there was a kind of wild, I'm a researcher, so there's this wild excitement in delving into what would make this work. Can I bring out that golden nugget? Can I take this thing that is seemingly obscure and can I bring it into profitability? And I didn't want to buy anything expensive. I needed to decide, hey, I want a low cost, low maintenance model. So when I'm talking about for the mushroom growing specifically, we're talking about low cost of the setup functions for the equipment, the low setup costs for the distribution. And one of the biggest items in this was the substrate, the thing that would help grow the food for the mushrooms and the mushroom spawn and develop these little clusters. And I decided that in this research process, I decided that oyster mushrooms was going to be the best because they're well known for being robust, beginner friendly, and have this smaller learning curve. So I did research and decided to buy some pre-sterilized substrate blocks. And this saved me kind of the tricky step of sterilizing my own substrate. Instead of having to do the grinding and the mixing myself in the bucket, I had a low cost block, essentially a low cost block, to get that process started without all the extra mess. And when you do the substrate, I have found out that in the beginning, if you do it incorrectly, you end up killing spores. You can't nurture the correct environment for them. So, having a not expert, but having somebody that deals with substrate on a daily basis, I could source the food material essentially faster at a more efficient quality to get this started. But the process itself is of growing the mushrooms, these oyster mushrooms, I found was very fascinating. So, first was the inoculation stage, and that's when you introduce the mushroom spawn to the substrate. And then it goes into this incubation phase where the mycelium and the root network of the mushrooms will grow throughout the substrate. And this happens in the right environment of, dark, humid. And I learned very quickly through this research that since the sensitive nature of mushrooms to the outer environment. So when looking at what I have available for me in terms of humidity, in terms of light, I found out very quickly that dry humidity is different than wet humidity, and how that affects the size, not tenacity, sorry, the resilience of the mushroom, and then the texture of the skin on the mushroom for the harvesting process. Nobody wants a hard rocks like mushroom due to either bad substrate or bad growing process. And so I learned very quickly that this sensitivity was crucial in the growing process. So if it's too dry, too humid, too cold, too warm, everything has an impact on one step or multiple steps of the mushroom growing process. And with that, contamination of the outer environment is just insane. So, mold, that thing loves to grow around mushrooms, and with one careless moment, you could have a cluster of mold around your wooden floors, carpet, walls, even the paint starts to peel, and it will ruin your entire house. And I didn't realize the level of isolation that you need to have in a mushroom farm to grow. But moving on, uh, moving on, the so the fruiting phase was what I found the most interesting. Once you get the mushrooms into the substrate, and then you are nurturing them over a certain period of time, there is a fruiting phase where they continue to colonize and build upon each other from that from the initial spore environment. And if you check it, a couple times a day, make sure the conditions are carefully curated through the misting process, that you pretty much create this earthy smell and earthy environment that it's hard to describe over video what it smelled like. But have you ever dug your hands into wet earth with kind of a worm? Maybe worms are growing in it, and you pick up that and you just smell it a little bit and think, yeah, this is nature. This is that. That's kind of what the what was described, and how I kind of saw the entire fruiting process in this microclimate. But the through the experimentation process and through the setbacks in terms of finding out the temperature curation, the water curation, kind of when, where, how I should keep my substrate moisture and keep the overall environment kind of isolated from any external factors in the other grow labs, that there was a kind of moment after the weeks of experimentation that I saw a bloom of a cluster of oyster mushrooms, and it smelled pretty good. When you're not using a series of pesticides, or you're not using growth hormones, similarly to how you would see it in a chicken farm, the smell, the texture, all of these nuance pieces of information to your senses, it was incredible. Uh, it wasn't anything that you normally would see in mass produced sourcing material. So if a restaurant that sources all their mushrooms from packaging from a mass farmer or something like that, you're going to have a distinct texture that's almost rubbery. I'm thinking of those white oyster mushrooms that you come in the packages at grocery stores, and it doesn't taste, or the taste on your tongue doesn't give you that thing that you need to know that it's natural or organic. Um, but but anyway, I've gotten way too far off from the business aspect of things. I think I'm going to chalk this video up to a learned lesson of do better in script writing and stay less on the storytelling and more on the actual practicality of the business. But let's go over it from a standpoint. I'm just going to ignore the script at this point, and I'm going to speak to you as somebody who would start a business up from the ground up as a mushroom farmer. So we've talked about the cost of goods. We've talked about the sourcing. So what do you actually need in starting this mushroom farm? Yeah, let's get serious with it. You have, let's say you have this closet to work with. There's a small, let's say 3 feet by 5 feet of space that you have allotted for this mushroom farm. And you have decided, okay, I need to grow this, or I want to start this hobby. The first step that you should take before you actually buy anything is you should source out who your potential buyers are going to be. If you preemptively know your audience before you actually buy the products, you can kind of gauge where you should be at on a certain timeline. So, example, you have 3 grocery stores in your area, and you go to them and you speak to the general manager and you ask the general manager, hey, do you have somebody that you source your mushrooms from? Or do you need more mushrooms in your inventory, and you strike up a conversation. Business is in the relationships. You strike up the conversation, and let's God forbid, they don't say no and they say, yes, we need mushrooms. We need this amount of mushrooms. Hey, can you provide this amount of, let's just say, for all intents and purposes, yes, this mushroom, or we need mushrooms. Can you get them for us? And so you say, okay, I got one customer who is ready, willing, and able to buy my mushroom. They want to buy 1 kilogram of mushrooms. Okay, you've checked off who your audience is going to typically be. You have it. You have it before you even start. So now you want to fulfill that order. You want to know that at the end of a certain period of time, you have 1 kilogram of mushrooms. So what goes into the mushrooms? Well, we need the spores to grow the mushrooms. We need the substrate. We need we need obviously the tools to grow, or the not tool sorry, I'm thinking trowels, but I'm also thinking that little claw thing where you dig throughout the soil. But imagine yourself in a 10-liter drum. I don't have the specific numbers on how to produce 1 kilogram of mushrooms, but let's just say 1 kilogram of mushrooms equals a 10-liter bucket. Well, you need the bucket, you need the spores, you need the substrate to grow, and or to not extract, but to implant the spores to produce the clusters. You have that. Well, you also need the aftermarket for it. So bags. You're talking about transportation. Do you need to keep it on a cool platform? How do you want to package it up? How do you want to distribute it to this grocery store that wants the 1 kilogram of mushrooms? So you have that. Well, how are you going to get the bucket to have the holes for the clusters? Well, you need a drill. So if you don't already have a drill or don't already have something to create holes, you can puncture it with a knife, dig it out, however you want to do it. Sandpaper for grooving out the edges if you need and you need to get off all the excess. Okay, so we have so far it's one bucket, it's full up. Let's just say you've already planted. I'm definitely not going to talk to you about the planning process because this is conceptual. Now we have the bucket, and now we have the sport. Now it's growing. We have a certain amount of time, so 6 weeks. 6 weeks to produce that 1 kilogram. Well, calculate how much went into this first bucket, and then understand how much that first bucket sold for that 1 kilogram equals how many dollars to the store. You need that number that you get from the store more than each of the bucket costs to produce. An example, if it costs you $10 to make one bucket of 1 kilogram, and you can turn around and sell that one bucket and 1 kilogram of mushroom for $22, you just made a $12 profit. Then you take that and you buy another bucket, you buy another substrate, you buy another, and then you find another client. This is the conceptual idea of building a mushroom business from your garage or from your closet, essentially. And you take that and if you do it consistently and you build the relationships with the suppliers of the seeds or spores, or you create your own seeds yourself, and over time you can become the seed dealer when you produce the biggest mushrooms or the most flavorful mushrooms, and now people want your mushrooms. But taking that and essentially you keep doing that loop of plant, harvest, sell, expand. And you do all four of those steps, and I know it sounds easy and it sounds simple. It's not, and I'm sorry, but it's going to take work. It's going to take consistency, and it's going to take a little bit of pivoting based on problems that you will inevitably run into during this process. We're talking about dead plants. We're talking about suppliers that back out, buyers that back out. You might get bored. You might run into a problem of a fire, or the the mold takes over and you need to repair something. But if you do have an unused corner and you are looking for this kind of weird, out of the ordinary side hustle that could potentially make you profitable over a certain period of time, don't get too deep in the weeds of researching, because it is a viable model using these 4 steps. You just need to focus on the growing, the buyers, the suppliers, and the cash flow. If you do and focus on all 4 of those things in the business and remain consistent in your relationship building, or finding new ways of doing customers. You have digital marketing, you have brochures, you have word of mouth. If you can get 4 customers, or maybe 2 customers, before you ever even get your first spore cluster, then you've kind of started to create this pipeline for yourself, and you can grow it over time and remain consistent with it. I promise you, consistency is king, and you doing it and you carving yourself out a little bit of reputation around having the best mushrooms, the most succulent mushrooms. What are other common adjectives for mushroom tasters? Anyway, I digress. If you enjoyed this video, if you enjoyed the process, please like and subscribe. Leave your comments down below. Are you doing this? Are you doing something that's similar to mushroom growing? Talk about it. Let's have a conversation. And if you disagree with my opinions, also leave it down below. I would love to learn more about your perspectives and your viewpoints. And I hope to see you guys in the next one. Bye. If I could pause it.